Hello.
Chewbacca likely spared Kylo Ren's life by hitting him in the abdomen. What if Chewie killed Kylo Ren? How would the galaxy fare without the heir to Vader's throne? On the inverse, how would Rey handle the missing piece to her dyad with Ben Solo? Would she continue in the light or turn towards the dark? Special thanks to Artsavers for sponsoring our 75,000 subscriber lightsaber giveaway. All the details are in the pinned comment down below. Our story begins inside Starkiller Base. Chewie's best friend had just fallen into a bottomless pit, slain by his son. A million memories washed through the Wookiee's mind. He knew he would outlive Han and Leia and Luke. It was just biologically how his species worked. But never in his life did he think he would have to watch his best friend, the man who escaped the Imperial custody during the siege of Mimban, the man who escaped the clutches of Crimson Dawn and its leader Kira after the death of Dryden Voss, the man who joined him on countless adventures, such as finding and defeating 2 Death Stars, dethroning the Empire, and the beginning of a family on Chandrila, be slain by his son. Sure, things were always different since the divorce, but Chewie knew nothing hurt Han more than having to let his son go when he joined Luke's academy, and the eventual corruption under the crookedness of Snoke. Chewie flashed through all his memories with Han and Leia's boy. Ben Solo was a spitting image of Anakin Skywalker. Dark hair, tall, a little awkward, sweet, but troubled. Chewie was there for Ben when his father couldn't be. There's no saying that Han was a bad father. He loved Ben, and it was obvious, but he just didn't always communicate it in the best way. That was who Han Solo was, and Chewie understood that, and he explained it to Ben as best as he could. Chewie remembered sleepovers and building tree houses on Chandrila. He remembered Ben's first time inside the Millennium Falcon, and the moment that Ben first took over the controls of the Falcon on his dad's lap. He remembered Ben's first time seeing the jump to hyperspace, and he also remembered seeing Ben's great excitement when he displayed his lightsaber for the first time to his family. But Chewie also remembered the fall, and what it did to Ben's parents, which led to the separation. Chewie looked down in a screech of anger and he roared. It echoed across the massive chasm, and stormtroopers were alerted to it, but they were not the only ones. Ben heard it, still coming to grips with what his step forward had done, something that he thought he would be able to overcome, but in this very moment, he couldn't. He heard the roar, and before he could distinguish where it came from, he heard the ring of the bowcaster. Chewie had 2 choices. He originally settled on Ben's torso, but upon realizing that this was not the boy he used to be, he changed the location of the shot, flipping it up ever so slightly and blasting Kylo Ren in the chest. Kylo was thrown from his feet with the power of the blast. Ren was fortunate to have the blood of Skywalker, otherwise he'd be dead upon impact. He fell backwards and put his hand out in front of him, catching the bridge as he tumbled back into the pit that his father fell down into, holding on for dear life. The pain of the blast etched itself across his body, and he winced, trying to hold on. He heard the ring of the bowcaster once more, and the blast slammed into the bridge where Kylo's hand was. The blast destroyed the entire piece of the bridge that Kylo was holding onto, and it also ripped his hand apart. Chewie's attention was dragged away as Kylo fell to his death, and he began blasting stormtroopers approaching him. They were no match for his skill, and he blasted them into pieces. Nothing beat it. It's something Chewie and Zeb love to bicker about, the satisfaction of obliterating stormtrooper armor. Zeb Aurelius used a Lasan Honor Guard AB-75 bow rifle. It wasn't anything like the Wookiee bowcaster, but it packed a punch. Zeb's weapon also had an electro staff on it, and he used to say how much he enjoyed shocking troopers and slamming their heads together with his bare hands. Chewie definitely loved slamming their heads together, but he much more enjoyed the punch of the bowcaster and how much it packed and what it did to Stormboy armor. Chewie knew he had to get to the Falcon. Both Rey and Finn did the same thing, both of them escaping into the Force. Finn trying to get Rey to the Falcon because he knew where it was. The sound of X-Wings continued to echo across the skies, and a dogfight was still present. The planet of Ilum was alive, despite it being a superweapon, and a deep snow began to fall. Both Rey and Finn were emotional over the loss of Han, especially Rey, being that Han was more family to her than anyone had ever been. The 2 of them were able to find themselves to the Falcon by the time Chewie got there, and the rebels hopped onto the ship and lifted off. It was perfect timing, because Resistance pilot Poe Dameron obliterated Starkiller Base's oscillator. The Millennium Falcon joined up with the other Resistance fighters as Starkiller Base exploded behind them. When the heroes of the Resistance returned to Dakar, Rey met with Leia and told her what had happened. Leia knew, and she gave Chewie some time to digest his own feelings, as per usual with Wookiees. She would be by his side when he was ready. On the other hand, BB-8 and R2-D2 would put together the pieces of the map to find Luke Skywalker. With the information revealed, Leia would wish the Force to be with Rey as she and Chewie departed for Ahch-To, on the far side of the unknown regions. The 2 of them immediately took off and disappeared into hyperspace. Eventually, Rey would find herself on the Temple Island of Ahch-To, alongside a reluctant teacher and Luke Skywalker. Her time on Temple Island would be extremely difficult for her to deal with, especially being that Luke was very uninterested in the prospect of continuing the Jedi or teaching her. Her connection to the Force drew her to highly powerful locations on the island, such as the original Jedi Temple, which was a tree located on the island that housed all the original Jedi texts that Luke had collected over his time as a former Grand Master of the Jedi Order. Rey's interest and discovery of this piqued Luke's interest in training Rey, and so he began his training with her, with 3 lessons. The first lesson would consist of understanding the Force that, in Luke's mind, at this point, did not belong to the Jedi. While the Force didn't in reality belong to the Jedi, the misconception was that the Jedi never tried to control the Force, because their existence always coincided with it. During this lesson, Rey, who, having grown up on Jakku, fighting for herself and defending herself from adults her entire life, naturally was drawn to the dark side. The dark side gave answers. It was a short-term answer, but the long-term often induced one to have a pain-stricken life. There were other reasons for this affinity towards the darkness. However, it wasn't one that belonged to her parental lineage, rather an ancestral lineage, one that went beyond her father and mother. Rey's second lesson involved the legacy of the Jedi, a legacy that aside from their mythos was one founded in continuous failure. In the Jedi's hubris, they allowed the most evil Sith to rise and nearly wipe out their order and the galaxy itself several times. This could be said for Revan and Vitiate in the old days, or Palpatine and Vader after the end of the High Republic era. Rey would dismiss this, reminding Luke of the ability that the Jedi could have, and yet it was received with negativity. A story of which would be told to her about his greatest failure, a story of which Luke wished had happened. Part of the truth, however, one full truth, she would have to find and interpret herself. Luke's idealistic version of the story was visiting Ben and his student turning on him. From Ben's perspective, Luke was the one to kill him. The third and most likely to be true story that Rey would not come to know is the most similar to what likely happened, which was an instinctual ignition of Luke's lightsaber that was followed by immediate regret. The lesson that an adolescent may have learned, but an adult had to relearn with a new perspective on life. Being that Luke 20 years before beat his father within an inch of his life, could still humanly struggle with the fear of losing everything he loved. Something that Luke couldn't admit having done, believing that his failure was a continuous legacy of the Jedi. Rey's belief was that it was a mistake, the failure of Ben Solo's loyalty to the ways of the Jedi, the failure of the student. Of course, the full truth would reveal that it wasn't just the failure of the student, but the failure of both parties. The fear of recreating Vader. Luke saw it all. He saw the monster that Yoda and Obi-Wan allowed to create, and couldn't face the burden of creating another. With Luke continuing to show a lack of interest in finishing his teachings with Rey, she would begin to continue her journey across the Temple Island. The Force was calling to her, and Luke Skywalker had cut himself off from the Force. This cutoff from the Force meant that Rey searched for answers by turning to the ever-so-comforting darkness. It's something that gave her comfort when she was alone on Jakku her entire life. It's something that gave her strength when she began to defeat Kylo Ren in the mental game when she was still imprisoned on Starkiller Base. She felt so powerful when she broke him, telling him his greatest fears to his face. Yet without the connection of the dyad and the Force that she was with Kylo, she had to rely on herself. When she entered the caves of Ahch-To, she learned that she was no one. At least that's what it seemed. She had to make a name for herself, whoever she was. She had to become what she believed best suit her. She had no place in the story of Skywalker. She wasn't Kenobi's or Skywalker's, she wasn't a Solo or anyone else. She was related to no one, which made her feel even more alone in a great, amazingly large galaxy. One so large and yet so empty. How could Rey try and continue to learn from a master who had no interest in her development? She couldn't face the whole First Order by herself. She couldn't be a hero. If Luke couldn't, then who could? As she sat alone, feeling more alone than she ever was on Jakku, goosebumps crawled down her soaked arms and tears drying under her eyes. She heard the voice call out to her. After she had her Force vision in the caves, she had to swim back up here, and the small blanket she had couldn't warm her. There was no one for her to connect with aside from the reflection of herself in the fire. Not even the flames could warm her soul. She felt so alone, and the voice that called out to her said her name. It was an unfamiliar, deep voice, one that told her that she had much more potential than a Skywalker could ever give her. The voice told her she didn't have to be alone, that she could be looked up to and fulfill her desires. She could have a place in the story that she originally didn't believe she belonged in. All she needed to do was leave Skywalker's island and come to what she was already confronted with. If she just came to him, then she'd be rewarded with all the accolades she'd always yearned for. Rey heard this voice, and she responded to it. She didn't know who it was, but she knew where to go. Rey abandoned the island before Luke could ever pick up on the fact that she was talking to someone else. Luke watched the Falcon fly away, and he instead prepared to burn down the Jedi tree left behind. Rey took all the books from the tree, and Luke had himself a confrontation with Yoda, one where he would learn the greatest lesson any individual, especially a master, could learn, that failure was the greatest teacher. While on the other hand, Finn and Rose were returning from Canto Bight with an individual who claimed to be able to sneak into the Supremacy, the Resistance, on the other hand, were running away and trying to escape the clutches of the First Order. When Rey and Chewie were in hyperspace, she was approached by a voice of another man, who she had never met before. This one claimed to be the voice of Anakin Skywalker, reinforcing her mind, telling her to continue down this path. She would find everything she looked for as long as she continued to listen to the voice that she would come to meet. Rey took this word and listened to it, wholeheartedly believing she was hearing the voice of the former Chosen One. As they came out of hyperspace, she used a small, individual escape pod and left the Falcon and landed on the Supremacy. It was there where she would be escorted to Snoke's throne room. When she arrived in the throne room, he claimed to have never spoken to her, informing her that despite his students' failures, she had the possibility to be a fine replacement. Rey wasn't keen on the idea of falling deeply or even at all into the darkness. It rewarded her on Ahch-To, but with the Resistance full of people she trusted, she believed that everything this man told her was nothing but lies, the lies of the dark side trying to draw her in. Snoke applauded her effort and her resistance, but assured her that she would become what she was always meant to be, truly powerful. Snoke could sense her power. He could feel a rage that sat beneath the surface, and it reminded him of the first time he encountered young Ben Solo. Ben was only 10 when Snoke encountered him for the first time, visiting his mind and seducing him to the dark side. Snoke obviously believed it was him doing it all along, but it never was. On the other hand, Rey was 19 years old. She was given the same form of attachment to Han, then to Leia. The only one who truly embraced her was Leia, but she was confused. She was alone, again. How could she rely on a bloodline that, aside from Leia, seemingly had no interest in her? As Snoke began his seduction of her, trying to convince her that the dark side would reward her with everything she ever wanted, the Supremacy was smashed by the rebel flagship called the Raddus. The move would later be dubbed as a Hodl maneuver, would jar Rey, but it would also cause the death of Snoke. The blast would break his throne and it would cut him in half. Rey, who was too shocked to do anything, would find the Praetorian Guard moving to ensure that the next highest in command individual was fine. Rey wasn't a threat to them or their leader. However, General Hux was the next possible leader for the First Order, and they had to ensure his safety. As the Praetorian Guard abandoned Rey in a throne room, the voice of Anakin Skywalker would call out to her again, telling her to take Kylo's TIE silencer and go to Mustafar. She would find a triangular holocron that was used by powerful Force users with great influence in their time. The object would bring her to someone who would assist her with her belonging. Rey listened, seeing no reason not to. While Snoke was gone and the Battle of Crait put the Resistance into a dire situation, Luke would use Force projection to place himself in front of the First Order and allow Leia and the remaining members of the Resistance to escape in ample time. It would take explosives to blow up the rocks that they were trapped behind. The hard thing for the survivors, especially Leia and Finn, was the disappearance of Rey. She had jumped to hyperspace, avoiding the wreckage of the First Order fleet. When she was in hyperspace, she was approached by another voice. This voice was similar to the first voice that called out to her. He told her that she was family to him, and that her story in the legacy of the galaxy had yet been told. He would assist her gain the proper belonging she desired, and he could help her become who she was always meant to be. The voice did something that Luke neglected to do in Ahch-To. He gave her the warmth she was searching for. It reminded her of what Han Solo did for her. With Luke's Force projection causing him to become one with the Force, all that remained of the legacy of the Jedi was Leia and possibly Finn. The young former Stormtrooper learned that he had the Force, but he was afraid to inform anyone. Leia could feel it, and she approached him, questioning him in secrecy if he believed that he could use the Force. To which Finn admitted he was unsure. Leia told Finn that she would be willing to assist him in his training. Leia was really worried for Rey, but she knew that Rey was likely struggling, and being that Chewie was unaware of what happened to her after the destruction of the Supremacy, they didn't know. There was a genuine worry that she had been killed. When Rey landed on Mustafar, she walked through an array of trees. There were locals about, but they weren't near the trees that she landed in. Rey snuck to a piece of metal that stuck out of the ground, and as she got there, she pushed the top of it off. Rey grabbed the triangular object, and when she turned around, she saw a massive castle on top of a cliff. It was falling apart, but it was tall and dark. Rey wondered what it was, or who it belonged to, but she could tell that there was darkness that accompanied it. When she got back to the TIE silencer, she took off and followed what in reality was a Sith wayfinder. She arrived at a blue planet full of thunderstorms and explosive sounds. She landed down outside of a massive complex and followed the sound of the voice to the center of the structure. As she got closer, the voice began to echo, and she rounded the corner to see a man suspended from a number of tubes. She walked through a clear area. Nothing was present. No test tubes or science experiments. It was all cleared out per the request of the Emperor. Rey was confused. Her fear led her to put her hand on the lightsaber on her belt. The voice of the man told her not to fear him. They were closer than she could ever realize. Palpatine continued, suggesting that his legacy could belong to her. Rey expressed her distaste for the dark side, and Palpatine used his decades worth of manipulation and continued. Palpatine told Rey that he would have saved her from Jakku, but his current state kept him from doing so. He continued suggesting that the Jedi were the ones to kill her parents. Rey was flabbergasted, and Palpatine told her that it was why Skywalker rejected her. She asked then why Anakin reached out to him. Palpatine's smile widened, telling her that Anakin wanted her to continue her legacy and to continue his legacy. She asked who he was, to which Palpatine told her that he was a family friend, someone who Anakin looked up to. Rey was surprised. She never knew about this. Palpatine told her that if she struck him down, he could give her all of his knowledge, everything that she needed, all the belongings she ever wanted. She asked why she had to strike him down, to which his answer was that he was much too weak to assist her, to give her the knowledge she needed, and to be the friend she needed. All she had to do was kill him. Rey expressed that she didn't know and she didn't feel right about doing this, and all Palpatine had to say is that he could help her connect to those around her. She would finally find her sense of belonging, and she would become one with herself. All the pain she felt with Luke would be restored by him. She continued to press questions. Why would Anakin go behind Luke's back? And Palpatine wove his lies deeper and deeper, filling her mind with everything she wanted to hear, the lies that she had nothing to refute. Eventually, she accepted what Palpatine had to say and ignited her weapon to strike him down. When her blade connected with Palpatine, she felt a surge of power, and behind her rang out a chant. She didn't understand it, but it was a Sith Eternal. The voices echoed throughout the massive arena, and she felt a sense of belonging. With her grandfather's essence passed into her, she felt connected to the dark side more than ever, and yet she didn't understand it. Rey looked at the throne, and the two Sith Eternal members walked over to her and guided her to her throne, insisting she sit down on what belonged to her. When she sat down, she felt powerful. The throne was massive and it was fit for her. With the Sith Eternal pandering to her, a number of individuals would come to approach her over the coming hours. In time, on the throne, she would face a great internal conflict. Her wants were to have connection, to have familial bonds, and to be appreciated. And now, she had that seemingly. In a way, these people who chanted to her were connected with her and appreciating her, but she didn't understand why. The darkness from her grandfather began to supersede even her own feelings. However, she would remain isolated here for a year. The Final Order was not ready to be released into the galaxy. For this year, Leia would gift her lightsaber to Finn, and he would begin to train on Algin claws with her. Finn's training would go well, and while Rey had no living teacher, she continued to practice in the dark arts, and the voice of her grandfather would instruct her on how to wield her lightsaber. Every Sith lived within her now. The rule of two made it so that the legacy of the Sith continuously passed down into her. She would train herself to use the collection of Sith holocrons that were here, gaining new power and allowing the darkness to corrupt her. It was something that didn't feel feasible at first, and yet the dark side was so rewarding. It gave her a legion of loyal servants, it gave her a sense of belonging, and she felt accepted by everyone. After the Final Order was ready, she was instructed by the voice of her grandfather to release the Final Order on the galaxy and await the arrival of the last Jedi. Rey, so blinded by her new powers in the dark side, accepted her role as the last Sith, the one to restore the power of the Emperor to the galaxy. The message sent out informed the galaxy that they had 16 hours to bow down to the dark side and surrender. If not, they would perish. This would have Finn on a journey with Poe and Chewie, which before the 16 hours were up would have Finn arriving on Exegol to confront Rey. He hadn't seen her in a year and he cared a lot for her still. He didn't believe she had turned to the dark side and neither did Leia. However, Leia never revealed to Finn that Rey was a Palpatine. When he entered the throne room, he could, after realizing his potential, feel her presence. But it was different. It wasn't as comforting and as warm as it used to be. Rey's essence was now dark and cold, but it was to her warm. The dark side gifted her everything she lacked internally. When her throne was approached by Finn, the Praetorian Guard who protected her raised their weapons, but she dismissed them. Finn asked what she was doing, to which she expressed that she was fulfilling her destiny. Finn pleaded with her to come back, but she got to her feet slowly and told him that he could join her. They could be reunited. They could work together and bring a new order to the galaxy. Finn was genuinely conflicted. He missed her, and he worried about her, but instead of taking her hand, he ignited Leia's lightsaber. Rey raised her hands and ignited her own lightsaber. It was orange, not quite fully blood crimson red, but it was getting there. She wasn't pure evil, not quite the last Sith, but she expressed her power through the usage of the dark side. Finn didn't want to fight her, but he no longer had a choice. She drove her blade forward and it caught him off guard. Finn parried her strike and then blocked her twice. The two of them moved their blades and collided. Rey shoved forward and Finn stumbled back and raised the lightsaber. She smiled and raised her hand. The top of the Sith temple opened up. Finn looked up and his jaw dropped. The Final Order fleet was ready. Rey raised her hand towards him and told him once more that she could train him. The two of them could work together and they could continue the legacy made of their own. They didn't have to be adversaries. Finn shook his head, yet there was doubt in his own mind. He had been a First Order trooper. He didn't believe in slavery at the galaxy, but at the same time he didn't want to betray Rey. He had no choice. She accepted that he wouldn't join her and used a move that her grandfather made nearly 60 years beforehand, making a Sith howl and lunging forward. Finn was caught off guard by it, barely defending himself from the strike. He used all of his training to keep pace, but with the boiling blood of the most powerful Sith of all time coursing through his opponent, there was only so much he could do. His final stand saw him trying to hold his own, and he was struck down. His chest cut open, and he was left looking up at the sky. Rey returned to her throne, and communicated to the Final Order to move out. The Resistance was making its way to Exegol, and by the time they got there was only one remaining vessel, and it was a First Order destroyer. Thanks to General Pryde, who remained loyal to Palpatine for all the years since the fall of the Empire, gathered together the First Order and the Final Order for his new Empress. Especially because she was his Emperor's granddaughter, he did it. When the Resistance arrived, they were confused by the lack of fleet, and they engaged the Resurgent-class Star Destroyer left behind. Rey, who was digging into her ancestral power, sat back down at her throne and used electricity and shot it up into the sky, absorbing all the Resistance ships, completely crippling them. Finn, who was still hanging on to life, watched the Resistance fall apart and begin to lose. His last breaths saw Leia's Tantive 4 falling to the surface of the planet, followed by the echo of his explosion. The Final Order would stretch its arms out across the galaxy. While Lando was able to mount up a formidable force to destroy the Final Order at Exegol, once planets began being destroyed, the fight was over. The Final Order instructed all Resistance fighters to surrender or be destroyed. With system after system disappearing from the galactic map, they had no other choice. The Final Order, in the image of the Empire, took full control over the galaxy, forcing the Hope out of existence, and with the final destruction of the Jedi, with Finn and Leia gone, this new Order of Darkness, led by Rey Palpatine, would take complete control over the galaxy. She would allow General Pryde to exude full control over the Final Order's military. The Resistance's defeat was solidified with the destruction of Coruscant. Rey would continue her grandfather's legacy by sending out the Final Order to hunt down and kill off children of the Force, while she herself would begin a new Order of Sith, based in the legacy of evil and in the legacy of Emperor Palpatine. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Gallivant Gaming, White Lightning, Tristan, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Jedi Sloth, Mad Magic Studios, Anakin003, Lemon Knight, Rex the Wolf, Man with 3 first names, Dark Saint 46, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash the like button, you know what to do. Let's talk about the story. So, you guys thought Rey Palpatine was fun. Nah, she's kind of mean. So, this story is obviously a dark side story, but I think the dyad of the Force that is Rey and Rey and Ben Solo, that dyad is very integral to the story of Rey. I think there's obvious conflict in her in The Last Jedi, and I've mentioned this before. I love the sequels, I do. So like, I watch these movies as much as I watch the other movies. So like, I kind of continually evolve my own opinion on them and how I've interpreted them as stories. And Rey is undecided in The Last Jedi. That's why her outfits are gray. It's very on the nose, as Star Wars tends to do, again with George Lucas and Anakin's outfit being dark. You know, Rey's outfit in this moment is gray. Same with Luke in the Return of the Jedi. So Rey having the gray outfit in Last Jedi, which is part of where the story takes place, she is conflicted. She doesn't know where she's going. And then when Luke is neglectful to her and she doesn't have Ben Solo, or she doesn't have the dyad to relate to talk to have some kind of bond with, she immediately turns to the dark side. Now, the voice that was always calling out to her was always Palpatine. Palpatine, again, I've said this before, is the greatest villain in all of cinema, and he's just brilliant. And so he's going to do what he did to Anakin. He's going to do what he did to Ben, because it works. He did it to Dooku. He literally does it to everyone. He's just a manipulative mastermind. Like, he just knows how to manipulate people. And he would do the same thing to Rey. He would just tell her what she wants to hear. He did the same thing to Anakin. He told Anakin what he wanted to hear. He tried to tell Luke what he wanted to hear. He tried to tell Rey what she wanted to hear. You know, he's continuously trying to fill her mind. And because in this particular video, she doesn't have anyone that she can feel a bond with, that she doesn't have any belonging with, and because she's all alone, especially on Ahch-To and on Exegol for a year, she has nothing but to fall into Palpatine's plan. She has nothing but him, and him telling her, as like referring to himself as a family friend of Anakin, and that Anakin was like disappointed in Luke and all that stuff. Like, it would convince Rey. I mean, after a while, it would convince anyone. because it would be like, oh, well, that's Anakin, and this must be, you know, a family friend. And without Palpatine being like, oh yeah, I'm the Emperor, she'd be like, well, I guess that's, you know, I guess he's a family friend. I wonder how he got out here. And so, obviously, very dark side ending. In a fight, I don't think Finn really stands a chance against Rey. You know, they both have been fighting their entire lives. That's kind of their whole thing. But Rey being connected back to Palpatine is you know, but we love it. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. Fun video. As always, I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.